We are live once again with Coffee with Humans, streamed live around the world where I get to meet a new friend to make the world a better place. Welcome to Coffee with Humans, Bonnie.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. And when I was talking to you before the broadcast, I asked you, I sort of put you in the hot seat, and I said, "Hey, if you were going to name this chat, what would you name it?" And you talked about becoming unbreakable, and the subtext of that, I think, uh, based on a question that you answered when you signed up, is about self worth, confidence, doubt around life and being a woman. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say on that. But first, I don't know you at all. I've done zero research. And to our listeners and viewers who are regulars, you know this. I meet my guests just a couple minutes before we go live. But to all you new folks out there, Bonnie and I are just getting to know each other through this chat. So I'm curious, why did you choose to click the button to have coffee with me?
You came highly recommended by a mutual friend or interviewee, Adam Parr. I was on his
Oh,
podcast several months ago and I actually met him through somebody else. So, yeah, I checked out what you had going on and it looked interesting and welcoming. And I love having a chat. I don't want to just speak for 45 minutes straight yet. I'm working on that stage portion of my career, but yeah, these kinds of things are better off as conversations, in my opinion. So,
gotcha. Well, also for our viewers and listeners, I'm in Northern Illinois, and you are in where?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Through the magic of technology, we are joined, linked together in this coffee chat. Well, welcome to Coffee with Humans. We're gonna have a great time. Um, so you know Adam, huh?
I do, and it's funny because he's actually across the pond in the UK somewhere.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, he sure
so
is.
across the pond and back. You're a lot closer to me than he is.
That's
So
funny. Yeah, I find that a lot of people when I ask them, or why did you choose to click the button to have coffee with me? It is some little random connection. Know somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. That's I think it's fascinating. I love it.
I do too, because like I said, I met him through somebody else who I met through some. It was I can't even trace all the way back, and it's very some not very. I guess somewhat of like an unlikely connection too. Like if you think about how people get together in groups in person. Like the one guy's a graphic designer. Runs his own business. That's partially part of what Posh Notions was. Adam's a transformational, coach and speaker, which is kind of what I'm getting into, but didn't know it 6 months ago when I was talking to him. So like, yeah, it's pretty fascinating to me too. How everybody kind of comes together.
Did
So
you find that that idea of making connections in these unlikely ways, is that new because of COVID and the necessity of going online to make interactions, or is
not
this
for
something
me.
no?
No, I have multiple chronic illnesses. I guess strongest being rheumatoid arthritis. So um, and we can get into that how all that happened. But a decade ago, I got really sick with a rare illness, and that kind of cut me off from the world very quickly, like almost basically immediately. Um, as far as I was always traveling to go see my friends and whatnot, and that kind of put that to like a halt way before COVID was in the picture. So not to sound, I don't know, but COVID was somewhat of like everyday life for me. It's just I stopped doing things like going to the grocery store because I'm high risk, but I was already quite accustomed to being at home most of the time.
Wow.
So
So did you find that this might sound a bit weird, but did you find that having to make connections in sort of non-traditional ways because you were sort of locked up, did that did that expand your world in an appreciable way?
you know what? Besides being afraid, like most people when COVID first hit, for me it was like I get to catch up. Like everybody else is slowing down, so I felt like because I had been going at a much slower pace than everybody else around me, because I'm dealing with illnesses and I've got 4 kids and I'm trying to build a business and all of these things. I was like, this is my chance to like accelerate and feel like I'm catching up to everybody else, which might not be the right mindset, but it worked for me. And I got ahead in what I was trying to do because I wasn't trying to manage all of the things necessarily that I was pre-COVID. Like my kids weren't in school and all these, my husband was at home, so I had more help. So there was a lot of different things. It affected me differently than a lot of people. I'm very grateful for that I was able to pull out the optimism and the positives from something that was super scary and, you know, causing a lot of agony and grief, unfortunately, around the world.
Well, it seemed to me like there were two types of folks who sort of developed through COVID. One were the folks who really took it into pessimism and this is the worst thing ever and we're all going to die. And then the optimists, and I don't even know if it's pessimism and optimism, honestly, but the folks who looked at their lives and said, how am I going to retool my life in this and make it better? And it sounds to me like your retooling actually brought you into a lifestyle that supported like the things around our lives, the circumstances were brought into kind of connection with the life that you needed to live to make yourself, more holistically healthy.
It did. And it's crazy because when I had first got the mindset of I can accelerate, I had no idea what that really meant. Like I was working on my apparel business, and then all of a sudden, all of these things started happening. And at the very end of 2020, I ended up on global TV, winning a global pitch competition with David Meltzer. There's not any way, shape, or form that in March, when I was like, oh, I have a chance to catch up, did I ever expected to end up on global television. So I pivoted like a lot of people. I went from making branded apparel, which was not really a necessity when things were shutting down, to people were coming and asking me to make masks. And I'm like, I don't sew. I don't know how to do this. And then saying, okay, third person asked me, and I was like, I believe in the law of three. I'm going to learn how to do this. And 2 weeks later, I'd learned how to sew, and I had masks on Etsy, and I'm making custom masks. I was able to take something I was already doing and apply it to this new skill. And I apologize, there's sirens. Apply some new skills and old skills together to come up with some new products. And I fell in love with the whole notion of sewing and upcycling things. And then in August, decided I was going to build an upcycling company. And I run to my mentor, David Meltzer. And if anybody doesn't know him, I recommend you go check him out immediately because he will change your life. He has certainly changed mine in the 2 years that I've known him. And like I said, mentoring with him was just amazing in and of itself. But I decided I'm going to do this, and the idea kind of sat there for a while, and David started running these pitch competitions on YouTube, and then all of a sudden they're taking it to global TV, and I never in a million years believed I belonged there. Like I was like, I don't have $1 million businesses. I don't have NFL backers. I don't have any of this stuff. And he prompted me. Actually, he called me out in private coaching group one day and was like, if anybody hasn't signed up yet, you need to sign up. That means you, Bonnie, and calls me out in front of like the entire group. And I'm like, oh shit, I got to do this now. And it's funny because I never intended to win. I didn't think I was competition for any of these people. Never, ever, ever dreamed that I was only doing it because I said I was going to do it. And because I didn't want to embarrass myself or embarrass David on global television. I didn't think I was even going to get on when I applied. I was like, okay, I applied. I'm done. I did what I said I was going to do. That's it. And one thing rolled into another, and I ended up on TV and virtually, of course, and end up winning this amazing competition. And it's funny because I got a lot of questions afterwards. I was interviewed quite a bit after the show. And, well, what's next? What's next? And I'm trying to come up with these amazing ideas. It's like, well, I'm going to build this company, and I have all these things built in, like voucher programs to get close to kids in need, and an emotional resiliency program for elementary kids. All these things that kind of were a byproduct of this business that I wanted to build. And over the past 5 months, I realized little by little, and we had a fire. Everybody's fine, but the fire itself and the fear that came with the fire sparked another learning phase. And I finally realized that the way I was trying to do this wasn't necessarily the most, what's the word I'm looking, efficient way to do it. And it wasn't the only way to do it. And now I'm kind of stepping into what I've always wanted to do, which I had never thought I could do, which is speaking and coaching and all of those things. So it's been if I've ever had a transformational year, 2020 into 2021 was definitely it for me. And I'm 43, so that's saying a lot. Even more so than getting sick did for me, which was definitely transformational in lots of different ways. So yeah, it's been a crazy, wild ride, that's for sure.
It sounds like it. So I'm piecing a handful of things together here from our conversation. One is that you ended up with some illnesses that significantly impacted your life in ways you didn't expect, anticipate, or want. And then you learned to deal with those things. And then I'm catching a glimpse of how you make decisions. And you mentioned this rule of three that you said, I believe in the rule of three. And so I'm curious, you're looking at the opportunity, it seems, and wondering, hey, should I pursue an opportunity or should I not pursue an opportunity? Or is this something I should look at? What is this rule of three about, and how does that play into your decision making?
So that's actually fairly recent, and that has a lot to do with intuition and paying attention to signs and really getting back to listening to myself, my inner self speaking, which for a long time I wasn't doing. So I have a long mental health history that precedes my physical health history. And I spent 2.5 decades on psychiatric medications, which meant I was basically constantly numbing myself in one way, shape, or form, and not even able to hear my inner self. Like everything that came up was either anxiety or depression is what it felt like. And what I learned within the past few years that really that was kind of my intuition screaming at me, trying to direct me. And I was just saying, shh, like not listening. So the law of three basically is just, I had 3 people ask me to make them a custom mask. So this is a very simple example to kind of explain this. And the first one I was like, no, I don't know how to sew. I have no interest in learning how to sew. The second one came and I'm like, kind of, maybe I should no, I don't sew. Like, I don't know how to do this. I'm not ready to get into this kind of thing. And the third one, I'm like, okay, fine. I get it. Like, you've made it clear to me that I at least have to take a look at this. And at that point in time, also was like, what else was I doing? Like, my apparel business had like crashed and burned because there was no demand for somebody doing what I'm doing at the capacity I was able to do it at. And I was like, it can't hurt. I already had a sewing machine. I already had stuff that I could at least mess around. I took the bin of t-shirts that I would have been making apparel with and cut those up to learn how to make masks. So, and it also was kind of like, it feels like being pulled towards something. Like the more I'm paying attention to this and learning how to listen to it, it really does feel like something physically pulling you towards this, whatever, an opportunity, a person, a thing, an idea. So yeah, it's just, if something comes into your life 3 times in a row, like especially that blatantly, you need to pay attention. And the same goes for, say you're trying to meet up with somebody, and say we were supposed to have this and I had to cancel, and then you had to cancel, and then I canceled again. And it's like, okay, this obviously just isn't meant to be right now, something maybe we can revisit later in the future. But something is telling me right now, 3 somethings, that this isn't just meant to happen right now. And that's okay too. Sometimes listening to it will steer you away from things that aren't necessarily meant for you. And had I not listened to that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now. As far as listening to these mask making signs, I was in a place where I didn't feel like I had a story to tell, which is kind of funny because it's only been 1.5 years and most of my story happened before that. But I didn't really think I had anything interesting to share, which is, I'm now learning that's the case.
Well, I think that's a pretty common theme for a lot of people, that they, we all live very vivid, meaningful lives, to ourselves, and have these nuggets of wisdom that we're just like, man, I felt like I stumbled on this gold. And then we think, it's really not that big of a deal. It's not that important. Nobody's going to know anyhow. How do you apply these thoughts? Because you talk about becoming unbreakable. You're also looking at self-confidence and doubt. How does all of this stuff swirl? Because I'm seeing it all, in space. How does it how is this focused down into something meaningful for your day to day?
So I guess my anxiety, depression started at a very young age. And a lot of it, now that I'm kind of digging through this, and trust me, the digging it can be really painful work, but it's very enlightening. And that's how I kind of figured out where it is I want to go and how I want to help people. I never felt I was good enough. I never felt, and when I was good enough for certain, wasn't good enough for certain people, like my father, for example, who's no longer with us. I was too much for other people. I was too smart. I was too loud. I was too hyper. I was too active. Like all of these things, too. So on one hand, I'm like kind of calming myself down. On the other hand, I'm trying to kind of make all of this other stuff perfect. And as a young child and trying to make friends, I was never really being who I am. Like I was constantly just molding myself to somebody else's expectation just because I wanted to be liked. And I think that's a common theme for most people on the planet, especially as a young child. You just want to be liked. And it wrecked my self-confidence. It wrecked my self-esteem. It wrecked everything from a very young age. And it took me all of this time. Now I've had glimpses of it. Of course, I've done things that I'm proud of, but I could never really step into, I could be proud, but it was so short-lived. It was like, okay, on to the next thing. I was always on to the next thing, always trying to, like that still wasn't good enough. And it took me winning a pitch competition on global television and then having a backslide of like, I don't know how I did this. I'm never going to be able to do this again. I'm not good enough. I don't know why they picked me. Like literally reverse imposter syndrome. Like normally you kind of have it beforehand and you're afraid to do the thing. It's like, okay, I set the fear aside and I did the thing. And then I get super excited. And then it was like, that was a fluke. I'm not, this isn't me, I really had to wrestle with that. I spent 4 or 5 months wrestling with that. And that's why I said the fire was kind of like the last thing where I got struck by this fear right in my face. And it was the first time in my entire life where I allowed myself to sit with those feelings and feel it and go, okay, what the hell does this mean? And let myself realize that like, I'm not going to die because I'm afraid. Because sometimes that's what it feels like. Anxiety literally feels like you're going to die from this imaginary thing that you've kind of made up in your mind. Whether it's a real event or not that's going to happen, you've literally exacerbated, the terror of this. And when I realized coming that close to real death and, potentially losing my son in this fire was like, we're all here. And as scary as that was, like all of this stuff I've been making up in my head is nothing in comparison to that. Now, where do I go from here? And how do I help people with this? Because took me 42 years to kind of reconcile that the fear is just an emotion. The fear is not actually like a real thing. And I know I'm still kind of figuring it out, as you can probably tell for myself. But how that all ties into the self-confidence, I let other people's opinions of me and judgments of me hold me back my entire life. Like I didn't go after, the education that I wanted to go after because it wasn't what my father wanted. I didn't go after this because so-and-so wasn't going to like it. I spent a lot of time just trying to keep the peace because I was in such a constant state of anxiety. I couldn't handle things being like, I could handle the chaos, but I couldn't handle like anger, frustration, those kinds of things coming from other people. So I was always just, okay, I got this, or okay, I'll handle this, or don't worry about that, or we'll change this. And I was never really doing what it was that I really wanted to be doing because I was just trying to keep everybody else happy. And a lot of that comes from trauma. I had a lot of trauma from childhood all the way through, early adulthood, my 30s. And I want to be able, I am able, I'm changing that right now, to help a lot of people with everything that I've learned. Because it doesn't have to take a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades. If you can break down for somebody the steps that you took And it might not happen. It might not happen the same way, but you can teach people the feelings to reach for, the signs to reach for, those kinds of things, the techniques that I use. I still have anxiety here and there. Like, I'm still human. Everybody has anxiety. But there are things that I do now that take something that would have ridden me with anxiety for 2 weeks, where I've got it gone in 20 minutes. And if I can give that life back to somebody else, that's really what it is that I want to be doing, is helping these other people not basically make the same mistakes that I did because they didn't know where to look for the tools, or they weren't offered to them, like in my case, So yeah, as far as tying Unbreakable and kind of everything in together, I've been through a lot of shit, like a lot of stuff designed to break a person, a lot. And I'm still here. And that means I have a purpose much bigger than all of that crap that I've gone through. So
There's a book that comes to mind I read some time ago called The Power of the Other. And The Power of the Other talks about the role that other people around us play in our own growth or our lack of growth, and how sometimes when we are in these spaces where we need to make significant life change and we know it, we are just unable to get rid of some people who keep holding us back, who don't actually want us to change. Because if we changed for the better, then all of a sudden they're left behind and they kind of know it. And so they're doing like everything they can to craft this thing to like, stay with me. And it talks about this idea of, you know those people in your life when they walk in the room and you're just like, yeah, the energy comes back into the space and you're like, man, this is a great place. Or the people who walk into the room and you're just like, there's the feeling just like mutes. You're like, oh, the volume goes down and you're just like, oh, here we go. And how important it is that as we go along these journeys that we choose very specifically sometimes the people that we hang around with and who we talk to and who we choose to walk with. In your experience, because you talk about this as this very solid, kind of solitary thing, solitary healing, but you've got a couple kids and a husband around too. How have you seen that the need, or how have you seen the necessity of people around you play out in your own healing?
So when I first got sick a decade ago, it's been almost a full decade in August. I'm just going to briefly cover that because I think it's important. I had something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which I contracted. I'm not sure how you actually get it, but they're actually, and this is not a political thing, but it's something coming up again in the news because I guess some of the people who are getting vaccinated are getting Guillain-Barré, and it attacks your immune system. It attacks your nervous system. And what it did to me was it paralyzed me kind of out of nowhere. I tried to make it to the emergency room, didn't quite make it. I had to call 911, and they thought I had overdosed on drugs because I could hear and feel, but I couldn't move, I couldn't talk, I couldn't respond. And it's funny because I say that should have been the wake-up call. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. I was in rehab. It was like having a stroke. I had to learn how to use my body all over again. I lost my career. Like everything kind of just halted in a matter of minutes, honestly. And I remember coming home and I just wanted to jump back into my old life, right? Like this was a blip. It was another blip, but a negative blip. And that's kind of how I dealt with life, as you probably can tell, up until recently. It was like, I just need to get through this. But what I found is, like kind of said in the beginning, like I was driving to my friends. I was going to visit them. Very, very, very rarely did people kind of come to visit me. I moved from my hometown, the opposite side of the city. People didn't, whatever. And because I was still that people pleaser and wanted to be liked, I was, again, this is another place where I was overcompensating by always meeting the other person where they wanted to be, whether it was their house, we were going to place over their, direction. And what I noticed when I came home was, because I couldn't go out, because I couldn't party, because I couldn't hang with my friends or do all those different things that I was doing, a lot of them dropped off and out of my life. Some of them would call when they needed something or they needed a vent or to bitch or complain or whatever. And I was still kind of in that frame of mind where I was still doing that kind of, And it was interesting because a lot of, I would get somewhat resentful, like, do you have any idea what I'm dealing with right now? Like, I can't walk up my steps to use the bathroom. Okay. Like, I'm crawling around my house and you're complaining because your 17-year-old won't put his dishes in the sink. Now, that's something totally separate. But as you're talking about people, when I stopped reaching out to these people, they stopped reaching out to me. And the people who were most negative in my life started just dropping out. And at first I was kind of upset. And then I realized what a blessing it really was, because I wasn't being inundated with this constant negativity. I was able to focus on other things. And again, it took me a good 6-7 years to kind of start getting into a place, actually quitting all my psych meds in 2017. So it was about six and a half years or so. So before I kind of started really realizing how much better my life was going to be without all of these things. Because at first it was just like, I'm losing my friends and nobody cares about me. It's kind of how I felt. But as I started working on myself more, I realized that it is super important who you're surrounded. I have almost no tolerance now for complaining. I'm happy to be ears for somebody who's venting and looking for a solution. But I do have a couple of people that I have not yet or probably won't quote unquote fire from my life because they're relatives. But what I do instead is I just take them with a grain of salt. I stay true to myself. I don't stoop down and you shouldn't be complaining. I offer kind of like a positive whatever to whatever it is they're complaining about without kind of putting them. It's not about shaming the person. It's about kind of trying to uplift the person. So got one person who constantly starts their sentences out with whatever negative they're thinking. And I just kind of flip that and reply back in text. And I limit my contact with those people. And when I have to have contact with those people, I just prepare ahead of time, I guess you can say, and remember who I am and who I want to be, and that I don't have to let myself be dragged down by that. That's a huge thing that a lot of people don't realize. And it took me a long time to realize, is that we don't have to allow other people's energy to drag us down. We can let them be. You're still going to feel it when they walk into the room. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'm an empath through and through, and I feel energy from, across the street. Like, I just, the way I am. But I don't have to allow their energy to suck me down, which is what I used to do. I used to meet people where they were, no matter where they were, unfortunately.
How is that related to you being an empath and also people pleaser?
It makes things more difficult. It definitely means I spend a lot more time working on my own energy. I spend a lot more time focusing on gratitude. But it's also been a catalyst to becoming the best version of myself, because I know so strongly what I don't want to be.
So contrast that then with, you were this empath, people pleaser, who people would come into the room and you would do what? How are your interactions different from where you were at to where you are now?
Reaction's a really good word, right? We're in control of our reactions to everything, even if it doesn't feel like it. And I'll give you a perfect example. My husband worked this crap job that he hated. And I love you. He's probably never going to listen to this, but he was there, so he knows all about it. But he would come home every day miserable. And an hour before he was coming home from work, I would start getting anxious. Like, what kind of mood is he going to be in? Is he going to, are we going to just not talk to him? Is he going to shower and go to bed? And, and unfortunately, it wasn't a good place for him. And that's another thing that COVID kind of did for us was, I remember he got let go for COVID reasons. And then they called him back and he was there maybe 2 weeks. He's like, I'm not working here anymore. And I was like, yes. Now, even though it put us in a position where we had to figure out financially what we were going to do, I was willing to figure that part out, because it meant that he was letting go the biggest thing in his life that was making him feel miserable. What ended up happening for me, though, over time, is I was learning how to control my own reactions and how to not let other people's negativity affect me. Was, instead of getting anxious and anticipating him kind of coming home like that, it was like, what can I do to make the atmosphere better for him when he walks in the door, not meeting his negativity with more negativity. You know, if I couldn't muster up the extra positivity to kind of counteract, at the very least, I was being neutral, where I would ask him about his day anyways, because that's, again, not changing who I am, even though I know he's going to tell me that it was horrible and it sucked and he hated it. Like, I was still asking him. Like, I didn't avoid asking him the question, because like I said, it was really important for me to stay true to who I was after so many years of not doing that. But I would meet it with neutrality and say, I'm sorry you had a really rough day. And then I would let it go. And I would let him go do what he needed to do. And I would go back to doing what I needed to do, because it's not my job to fix or change him, right? It's not my job to tell him to quit his job. Now, of course, I suggested things that I thought that might help. But he's got to, just like I've had to, figure out who he is and how he wants to live his life. So that's why him quitting his job was a really big deal for me, because I'm like, he's getting it. Like, I'm not preaching it, but he was starting to kind of get why I had been putting in so much work on myself, because he deserves to not be miserable. He deserves to be happy. Like, we all do that. It's a birthright as far as I'm concerned. So
There's an interesting point that really stands out for me in that you talked about atmosphere. And I wonder if, and check this with your experience, I guess. I wonder if part of our responsibility as individuals in those intimate spaces is to assist in creating an atmosphere for the other person to allow them to more easily grow, more easily change. And what strikes me about that is that you talk about, your husband, he's working in a crap job for him. It's not doing his mind any good, probably not doing his heart any good, probably not doing your relationship any good. And so he comes into the space, historically, let's say, and he's, down on life, down on himself, down on you, probably. Everybody gets to pay for, the problem. And then probably my guess is you would come out with resistance and be like, hey, don't bring this into this space. And then all of a sudden it just becomes like this, hey, I'm not being heard. And it escalates into something that you didn't like, versus you saying, I'm just going to keep this space neutral. I'm going to do what I can.
I lost you.
To keep are we back?
There you are.
Sometimes the internet does these things. This is the glory of a live show.
That's okay. I got what you were saying, or keep it neutral.
Yeah. So now you're going to keep it. So now you've chosen to keep it neutral, and but not even that's just neutral. Keep yourself neutral, but design the atmosphere. Really be cognizant of what atmosphere am I creating, so that when this other person who I care about comes into this space, they can feel free to be themselves, let go in that space, do the work almost of being introspective themselves, and then looking at them going, hey, there's this big contrast now between these two spaces that I see, where I'm stressed out, at work, and I used to come home and I'm stressed out there. There's no contrast. Now it's like I'm stressed out at work, and then it's like, wait a second, I come home and now I've got peace, and or somebody who wants to provide peace. And now I see the stark contrast. Now I go about the effort of changing, my circumstances, because I really like what I see over here. How does that connect with your experience?
So I'm going to be honest. I think in the beginning, that whole people pleasing and keeping the peace thing was still a huge part of it, right? Like,
yeah,
he was at this job for several years. So it wasn't like 6 months and, I've done all this work and everything changed. It was it was a work in progress. And everybody's a work in progress, but the situation itself was a work in progress too. And that in the beginning, I didn't react out of fear of causing an explosive situation. Like, I didn't want him to go off, and then what it became was, when like you said, realizing that this is here and this is here, and you kind of like where this is, so you want to leave this. For me, it was like, oh, okay, this is kind of working. And I'm working on these other things, and then stepping it up a level where, again, working on myself was kind of having the neutrality. And I started hearing a lot too about holding space for people. And I guess that's really what I was doing, right? Was holding space for him to figure things out on his own. Because while I don't recommend doing what I was doing before, which is trying to make everything perfect for everybody all the time, that's just, it's unattainable and it will make you sick, point blank. It also doesn't help anybody grow. Well, I don't recommend that. I do think it's important, like we get into these relationships right now. I've known my husband, well, I've known him since we were kids, but we've been in a relationship off and on we had a break for a while, a little over 20 years. My oldest son is 21. So it's the thought, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I hadn't thought about this before, but it's really the notion of what is unconditional love, right? Now, you don't want to stay in an abusive situation. I've been there too, where, and I don't recommend staying somewhere where everything is toxic all the time either. But there's this idea that, like, I knew I could change. I know what he's been like, over 2 decades of knowing him intimately. And knowing that he has the capacity for love and compassion and caring and all of these other things. This wasn't like it was, this is how everything was and this is how it was ever going to be. Because if that was the case, I probably would have left. Like, I wouldn't have been able to keep myself in a situation where somebody was unwilling to be happy or make changes at all. But yeah, it's this, I think everybody goes through rough patches and hard things and acts in ways that they don't necessarily want to be acting all the time. And I went through, like I said, depression, anxiety. I went through being sick. I went through all these other things. And really, who would I have been as a person to be like, well, you helped me kind of get through all this other stuff, and well, now you're on your own. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just, not, and to really top it all off, the better I can help him become for himself, the better father he's going to be to our children, the better role model he is for our children. And, I know what it's like to grow up in a chaotic, kind of tumultuous environment. And I don't want that for my children, whether we're together or apart. So yeah, I think those things kind of they all work together. I'm not going to sit here and say things are perfect. I was yelling at my kids yesterday. Thank you, hormones. And really not liking myself at all. And I spent the entire day forgiving myself and giving myself grace and taking deep breaths and going, okay, this is not who you want to be. I don't know what kind of alien invaded your body over the weekend, but this is not you. This is another lesson, lesson in forgiveness. Right. And I woke up this morning and I feel like because I gave myself the grace and forgave myself and said tomorrow's a new day and I'm going to do better. And it's not like I'm like this every day. I woke up this morning and felt different, right? I felt more energy. I felt more awake. I wasn't kind of groggy like I had been the past couple of days. I was able to shift that energy. So I think it's important for us as human beings to do that just in general. I mean, can you imagine what our world would be like if everybody took the time to be a little more empathetic, a little more caring, kind of about the way other people felt? And I'm not saying, I'm going to try not to go onto a rant here. I'm not trying to say to always do what's going to make the other person happy, because you've got to take care of yourself. And there's a whole thing about everybody getting offended all the time about everything that I'm not even going to go into right now. But if we could take that time and just be a little kinder to each other, strangers, I think everybody would be a lot better off, especially here in the U.S., to be honest with you. So holding space for other people we don't even know.
Yeah, that holding space part I think is huge. And it seems that your path of pain perhaps allowed you to be able to hold space, and see things in a different light, see things in a different priority, perhaps. You talked about a fire, which you just offhandedly you offhandedly mentioned a fire without actually saying what you're talking about. But it sounded like one of those critical times where it was just a forced a forced reprioritization of what matters. Is that a fair assumption?
It is, and like I said, so like I was talking about before, and I like that you said about the holding space or switching positions here. It's allowing, and I'm again, I love having these conversations because I have a new discovery like every time I have a conversation with somebody. But I want to do for other people that was what I felt kind of what wasn't done for me, right? Like I was always trying to be somebody else because people didn't like whoever well, at least that's what was my interpretation as a child and growing up. It's like I couldn't be who I was. Nobody was holding space for me. They wanted me to be less of this and more of that and, whatever. And so now as an adult, you're right, going through all of that pain, I can identify and say, like, no, that's not right. You can't force somebody else to be somebody. You can remove yourself from them. If they're not who you want to be with, you can not, be around them. That's totally fine. But you can't force somebody else to be somebody else. And that whole notion of holding space for other people, because I know what it feels like to feel like I have to mold and shift and change depending on who I'm around. As far as the fire goes, briefly, so second week of June, actually I remember it was the 13th, and I only remember this because I've had to write it on multiple insurance papers. We had a really bad thunderstorm. Nobody got hurt. I just want to say that up front, which is why I was able to kind of blip past it. But we had a major thunderstorms come in, and earlier in the day, well, it's probably late afternoon actually, a branch landed on the high wires out in front of our house, so like 20 feet from my house, and was intermittently exploding for several hours. Okay, terrifying, because if you've ever heard that, it's like lightning striking over and over and over again. And I've got older children and I've got younger children, so they're 21, 19, 8, and 4. I was terrified. I was calling 911. I was like, you need to have somebody come get this off of here. Like, I can't, my heart was just constantly, every time it would calm down, you want to talk about like a constant state of fight or flight and anxiety, and we couldn't go anywhere. Like, it's storming. So eventually that stopped. It burned out or did something, but it quit exploding. And, but we had no power for most of the day. And my oldest son, he has one again, but he had an e-bike, and they've got these massive LiPo batteries on them, which is literally a series of battery cells in a casing, for this e-bike. Well, he was out working by like LED like flashlight lights, on his bike, and he had one of those batteries charging his phone because we had no power. And all of a sudden, it was like 10:30 at night, trying to get my little ones finally calmed down for bed in the dark. And all of a sudden I hear him screaming, and he comes running to the house. Here, the battery had started to leak, and then he was sitting in the driveway, and it exploded. Yeah, with his phone plugged in. And see, like he could have been killed. And thank God he's got his mother's reflexes. Jumped out of the way fast enough that he got sprayed with some of the lithium chemicals. We had multiple fire, because when that goes, it's like fireworks. It's explosions, and you've got 18 per battery, and he had 2 of these massive batteries. So when one went, it was just like bam, bam, bam. So literally it was like an explosive day all around. And someday I'll be able to tell this story and laugh about it and not get so emotional. But our truck was parked in the driveway, and all I thought when I first heard him yell and saw the flames was the truck's going to blow. Mm. And I know this isn't the movies. I honestly don't really know how that works, but it was literally maybe 3 feet from where he was working and where this fire was. And so I sent my little ones downstairs. I was like, go down here, take the flat, sit on the bed, down in the basement, be safe. I was like, I have no idea what's going to happen. And not knowing part, right, is always, no matter what we're doing, is the scariest part in anything that ever happens. My husband tries to hand him a fire extinguisher, and I'm screaming, like, don't send him out there, because I'm waiting for the truck to explode. I'm like, that fire extinguisher is not going to help if the truck explodes. And so I'm trying to control a situation that's virtually out of control. Mm-hmm. I can't get my phone to turn back on to call 911. Luckily, I shut mine off because we had no power. Didn't think I was going to need it. husband was on, he's calling 911. Luckily, our neighbors came running. So this was like a lesson in gratitude and, again, in forgiveness. Like, I was upset with my husband for a while. Like, why would you send him out there? Like, and it happened so fast. Like, I can't even, like, I wasn't looking at my watch, but by the time from the time it happened to the time the firefighters and the EMS and everybody left was maybe 45 minutes. So the thing that was sticking with me, because normally I would blip this off and walk, kind of be like, all right, we're done, was the wreckage was laying in our driveway. And when I called the insurance and the EPA and everybody else the next day, they were like, don't touch it. There's a potential that all the cells have not combusted yet, and you could have another explosion and fire. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, we don't live in a mansion with acres of land. Like, this is literally like 40 feet from my house. So anyways, I said that was going to be short. It wasn't really, and I apologize. But I was so afraid that something else bad was going to happen. And I couldn't shake that feeling. And it took them a week and a half to come clean it up. So, like, I literally had to sit with this fear. And it was interesting because, so that happened on Sunday. Monday, I'm kind of grappling and making phone calls and figuring out what's going on. And at some point on Monday or early Tuesday, I walk into my house and I look at my china cabinet, and I have all these books up there. I like to read a lot. And I see this Gabby Bernstein book, The Universe Has Your Back, Transforming Fear to Faith. And I'm like, you gotta be effing kidding me. And I pull this book. I'm like, this, and I have tears, and I get on my mentor, David Meltzer, has coaching on Mondays and Tuesdays. And I get on there and I'm like, you will not believe what just happened. And I'm reading this book, and it sparked this, for lack of better words, this I've read eight or nine books since then. That was a month ago. And just kind of going one after the other. But like I said, I allowed myself to sit with that fear, because previously, when anything happened, I would, okay, I'm okay. We're going to stuff this. We're going to move on. I've got things to do. I've got kids to take care of. And after getting diagnosed with all of these different illnesses, like I said, the rheumatoid arthritis being the strongest one, I would end up having this massive flare-up of symptoms from anywhere from 2 days to 2 to 3 months, where I was just completely exhausted. I was in so much pain that it like hurt to walk. It hurt to do all these different things. And it was so pivotal and such a big deal, like you were saying, because I realized 4 days later that I felt fine physically, because I took the time to sit and process and understand the fear, and realize that, like, really, really dig deep with these books, and realize that ultimately I was in control if I wanted to be. Even that was the last kind of thing. Well, maybe not last. There's probably lots more coming. But the last kind of thing that I kind of had to reconcile, that I had, because I didn't feel like I had control over the flares. It seemed like they would pop up out of nowhere. And if I had an emotional upset, that this was just kind of what was going to happen. And I was kind of how to deal with it. But I found another tool, to put in my, my toolbox, that ultimately is helpful in any situation. Like, this is something that we should be taught as children to do, allow our feelings, to process and feel them. And I don't mean get stuck there, because I've done that too, where we're so stuck, you can't get out of it for months and months and months. And that's not a good place. You don't want to unpack there. But you need to give your body, your mind, a chance to kind of just sort through everything. Let yourself know that you are really safe, and that's teachable. I was able to eliminate physical pain by properly dealing with my emotional pain. If that's not a big deal, wow. I don't know what is, because I know millions of people are suffering. And I always had the inkling that the emotional was kind of what triggered the physical, what I had. I mean, it might not have made me contract a Guillain-Barré, but it definitely made me more susceptible, and definitely made the road after way more difficult. It was all kind of a culmination of everything I had been going through for the past 30 years leading up to that.
Yeah.
So
I think it's, in my experience and the things that I've read, the body the body really does simply follow suit. It just conforms itself to what's happening emotionally and mentally in a person. And when we keep those things undealt with, those emotional, traumas perhaps undealt with, they come out in weird ways. Compensating, right? Compensating with people pleasing, or compensating, with making sure everything's perfect, or compensating with anger, or compensating by digging ourselves a hole and sitting in it all day. But the body necessarily goes with that emotion, and can't do anything else. And we become, like you talked about, sick in ways that we don't necessarily need to be sick. And then when we do deal with those emotions, it seems like what you've experienced is that there is a healing that comes through that. And as we become better at assessing those and working them through, the process becomes faster, and our body releases almost like this emotional toxicity out of it, right? It's like anxiety, the feeling of anxiety. I had a great one of my first chats ever was with, I'm going to forget his name. It might come to me. Well over a year ago, and he talked about how anxiety, the feeling of anxiety in your body, processes the same way as excitement.
Absolutely.
It is simply a change in how you view it. And so that excitement of, like, the excitable energy, if we're looking forward to something, it's like, great, I'm excited. But if we're in emotional distress, then we process it as anxiety, which then has a tendency to become a bigger thing, rather than just looking at it as, hey, I've got this, I need to look at it, I need to let it process through, and not be afraid of what's on the other side. Were you afraid, when you're looking, historically at yourself, were you afraid of what came next if you actually did process all of this stuff?
I don't think I was consciously afraid of it. I think what I was afraid of more was what was going to happen. So yes, I was afraid. But it wasn't afraid of processing. It was afraid of stopping. It was
How so?
afraid. It was just, I got myself such in a position where I always had so many balls in the air, and that I felt like nobody could do the things that I was doing the way that I was doing them. There was such a, like I said, combination of how these things kind of evolved in my life. I had a general subconscious distrust of people, although on the conscious side, I trusted everybody, which was also somewhat of a downfall. But I don't think I was consciously doing it, to be honest with you. It was more of, this hurts and I don't want to do it. Like I like I said, I was put on psych meds pretty young. I was 17, maybe in high school, and I was having anxiety that was causing physical issues. I was having a lot of stomach problems, lots of stomach problems, and I didn't even know that it was an antidepressant until a few years later, a couple years later, I guess. But I had learned at a fairly early age that if this happens, you take this pill and you feel better, which is unfortunately how a lot of the world operates. We're never taught to deal with the stuff. So it wasn't even that, I don't know if I didn't want to. It was like I didn't even know that it was a possibility. Like, I was in therapy for 15 plus years just as an adult. And I just recently learned a couple of years ago that cognitive behavior therapy was not just for kids. Like, my oldest is on the spectrum, and he went through a lot of different, different therapies. I didn't know that that was like a possibility for kids. Don't ask me why I didn't put two and two together, but I also probably wasn't necessarily looking. I was so focused on doing what I was doing for my kids. I wasn't really looking for a solution. I thought I had the solution, which was taking this pill, taking that pill. upping this one, downing that one. Every time something came up, the doctor would change the meds. He never suggested anything else. It was always, we'll change your meds. We'll try this with your meds. It wasn't like, did you talk to your therapist about that? And again, I know I'm an adult and I now take full responsibility for all of that. But going from being offered a solution at 17 that kind of just kept following and not ever hearing or being introduced to any other kind of therapy. And who knows, I might not even listen. Somebody said, you can go do blah, blah, blah. I'm going to be like, I'm not trying that. I don't know. It's possible, but it's, I just totally lost my train of thought. Oh, you were asking about I don't think I even realized that was an option for a really long time. The dealing with it, it kind of falls, and I'm reading a book now called, I think it's in the book I'm reading right now. It's called Imposter Syndrome, or Curing Imposter Cure. That's what it's called. And it talks about how a lot of us just believe that this is our personality and our personality is fixed. And I've actually read this in several books that I've read lately, that we're kind of taught that, well, that's how she is. Oh, she's just quirky. Oh, he's just, arrogant, or he's just whatever. And we're given these labels, and we kind of don't, unless we realize it later on or at some point that we have the ability to break free from this and we can be something different. We kind of just let that follow us through the rest of our lives. Like, I was hard-headed. I was stubborn. I actually stopped using the words tenacious lately because it almost started taking on a negative connotation where I had to kind of let go of that label in order to let go of some of the stuff that I didn't want to be doing anymore, because I was kind of pushing stuff that I just didn't need to be pushing for anymore. So yeah, like I said, I think unfortunately a lot of us feel like our personalities are fixed and that's the way we're going to be. And they don't tell you when you get put on, well, at least I wasn't told. And I know lots of other people I've talked to weren't told. This is something you cure. If you're labeled bipolar, like, that's your lifelong label. Like, I was labeled a lot of things. I have lists and sheets and lots of medical files of all of these different titles and labels that they gave me. And you're never once told that if you do this, this, or this, that might not have to be your life anymore. I had to figure that out on my own. And that's another thing that that I want to be sharing and teaching other people is, my doctors told me 10 years ago I was never going to get better. I was only ever progressively going to get worse. Rheumatoid arthritis is a deteriorative disease. My spine is falling apart right now. But I'm in a much better place than I was a decade ago, whether or not my spine is chipping away. You know what I mean? But my doctors, like I said, that's what they told me. And that's what a lot of the doctors tell people. And they ultimately get stuck in that place of, I'm never going to get better. This is only going to get worse. And I think it's really important that they know that doesn't have to be the case. It still takes a lot of work, but it doesn't have to be the case.
So is that what you're doing now through this Posh Notions thing?
So Posh Notions.
What's your path?
Posh Notions is my apparel brand, making brand. I make other people's basically branded apparel, logo gear, organization of businesses. I am not just giving it up all of a sudden, but I'm slowly shifting my way into speaking and coaching. I'm coaching a few women now. I also started writing a book a while ago that I'm going to actually dive back into with all the new lessons that I've learned. And so, yeah, it's funny because 2.5 years ago, I told my coach that I wanted to speak and I wanted to be on stages, but I didn't think I had, like I told you earlier, anything anybody wanted to hear. I thought I had to build the business and do all of these different things. Like I said, I never expected to land on TV, but it's, besides the fact that it's really cool, it's probably one of the best things that happened to me, because it helped me unravel all of the reasons I thought that I shouldn't be on stage and reinforced that those are all the reasons that I should be on stage. That's
great. I love that.
Thank you. I did. It felt like several years ago, who was going to listen to me? I'm sick and I can't do this, this, and this. But it was like, but I've done all of these other things despite being sick. And so that's where I'm headed. I'm headed to get the message out, I guess is a good way to say it, is that people don't have to stay stuck. They're not broken. And and hence Unbreakable. I am actually working on a project I started 2 years ago called the Unbreakable campaign under a rebrand. Get my tongue tied. With a partner and friend of mine now, which is a platform where people can share their unbreakable stories, their hero's journey, what they've gone through, and the effort to inspire other people. Because the more people we can kind of get doing this, even if it's only a one-off thing, the more people we can help. So that's at unbreakablestories.com if anybody is interested in checking it out. I'm super excited about that because watching my baby finally kind of come to fruition and help people is just amazing to watch. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm headed. Had you asked me a month ago, I would have told you I was building an upcycling company. I kind of put that's what I pitched in my pitch.
Yeah.
And that may be something I do later, but I realized that that's not something I want to be in necessarily in the trenches of. Yeah. What I wanted was what I thought I was going to be able to afford to help the money. Was going to take the money and build all of these programs for children. And I realized, like I said, that there's other ways that I'm more suited and more effective at doing that. So that's kind of what I'm planning to do.
Wow. Well, thank you, Bonnie. We're at the end of our time here. What a great way to spend an hour unpacking, your storyline, and how you are turning that story into something powerful and meaningful for other people, so that they don't have to go through the length of time. Perhaps they can shorten their own healing and growth and come to the conclusion that you came to, which is you don't have to stay where you're at. You can change, and you can become unbreakable. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm thrilled to be able to help you get your message out, and I'm honored that you spent an hour with me, getting to know me as well. So, thank you so much to all our viewers and listeners. Coffee with Humans is live stream talk show globally, where I just have a chat with somebody new and get to know them for about an hour. And I met Bonnie now a little bit over an hour ago, and we've just got to know each other through this time. And you can catch her at unbreakablestories.com or poshnotions.com. That's been on the screen several times here. And subscribe, share, and catch us next time. Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you so much.
One of the things I love about Coffee with Humans are the raw conversations I get to have, meeting new people just like you. If you or someone you know should be on Coffee with Humans, go to coffeewithhumans.com. Remember, the only rule is no sales calls.
This has been Coffee with Humans. Subscribe to get updates or click to have coffee with me. coffeewithhumans.com.